Calvin, we're here, and we're here for a short one.
Hey, hey.
We did 2 podcasts last week, and then I didn't post one until Sunday because I uploaded it, and filled all the information out, and then forgot to hit sign or hit publish.
This is the beauty of, slot machines and loot boxes, using random reward schedules to hook people. So, you never know when you're going to get a podcast, I guess.
That definitely doesn't work at all in this. That definitely does not work. Definitely not at all. But we're trying. I don't know, figuring it out. But yeah, one of the things we wanted to talk about today was getting, at a quick clip, we're going to go into this a little bit, but coming out of different teams and different groups over the years, I think one of the biggest things that's important for designers to be aware of, or at least attempt to do, is to get buy-in from their team before saying no, this is it, we're doing this, moving on, and start building features, right? And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that, and I think that there's some techniques that really work and some techniques that don't. And there's also just a lot of team dynamics that just mean that, sometimes you just, can't get it, right? Sometimes you just don't get that buy-in. And you kind of have to be that judgmental decision to say, no, we're doing this, right?
Yeah, and this happens at all sorts of levels, whether you're at a bigger company or you're just doing a small game jam team. You're gonna, man, there's a lot to it, and it can really... Even if you are officially the designer, boy, it can hurt morale if everyone's on a different page. So this is pretty important for teams.
I'll start with this then. In your opinion, how important is it that every single person on your team is aligned or on the same page?
I think that totally depends just on the person. There are just some people that are willing to go along with something, and they trust those persons. So those people are just a little bit easier to work with.
How do I hire yes people? If you're a yes person, please apply here.
There was a team where this was going to be the last time I would be able to work with this team for a game jam. So I was like, "Come on, guys, let's do it. One last ride." And I mean, I don't want to sound like a power crazed person, but it was nice because they were like, all right, Calvin, what art style do you want? I was like, hey, it's you guys are the artists, you're the experts.
I would do the same thing though. I'd be like, Calvin, what are we building? Calvin, please. just tell me. I don't care. Just make fun.
yeah, but they're like, no, this is your last ride, so give us it. And I was like, all right, Yoshi's Island, copy. I want this awesome art style. So, but then there are some people who are like, this isn't very fun, and they'll kind of hop in the game designer role, even if they're, even if they came on as a coder or whatnot. And it certainly would be good if they were great at game design as well, but their ideas will clash with yours. So, yeah, to answer your question, it is a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, there's something about it. I mean, it's definitely case by case. It is funny talking to people, in these positions and roles and over the years, and just being like, there's a lot of people who do game jams, and it's a lot of it. I can't tell. This is why the thing is, when I look at game jams, I'm like, is it a lot of hobbyists? Is it a lot of people who work in the industry, or is it a lot of is there just so many more indie developers that you just don't really realize the breadth of the industry outside of commercial games at the same time too? Because a lot of people that I work with over the years don't ever do game jams. They don't ever try.
Oh no, not at all.
They won't explore an idea or sit down and say well, what if we did 2 days and just try to figure it out, right? A lot of that just doesn't happen, right? For whatever reason, better or worse, it doesn't matter. That's not the point. But each to their own. If you work all day, I get it. If you work all day on video games, building video games, do you want to go do Loot and Dare on the weekend?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way,
I do.
Yeah.
Am I a psychopath?
And by the way, Loot and Dare just upped their thing to now doing 3 times a year. And I'm like, oh man, it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough, but No, you're absolutely right. Like even at my last studio, it took a while to galvanize and grab everyone to work on these things with me.
Hmm. The thing that I'm always handling or trying to figure out is like I want as much team creativity in these moments as possible. If we're gonna do this, like let's do it together, right? Especially if like we've all been making games, we've all been doing this for a while. Like, let's have some fun. Like, what do we want this to be, right? And I really push for that consensus because I just don't believe in designing in a bubble. Uh, I can. I can design myself out of a paper bag, but I don't like to do it. I'd much prefer to be like, okay, here's a couple of ideas, right? Just sketch them out, just really, really quickly, run them through with the team, and just say, hey, what do you guys think of any of these? Here's some reference from some other games that do something similar. What do you think about how these games like tackle this type of idea or this type of theme or something like that, right? And I try to not lead people into just direct discussion of like, okay, it's this and then this and then this and then this and like, what do you guys think, right? Like, so the first set of ideas are so loose that I always get worried that people are going to lose confidence in me as a designer by giving them such loose ideas straight off the top, right? Like, I could take those things and move them into something else, and I know that I could do that, and that's kind of why I'm pitching it, but, I might just pitch, like, random things of just, like, it's crabs. You know what I mean? Like, like, whatever, right?
Right.
It's like, like, what if it was like that, right? And just kind of really flip the script on people. And I never feel that, I always wonder is, like, do engineers then sometimes feel like, oh, now I gotta go do the designer's job, or like blah blah blah. Like the designer should just like give me the design and everything like that. But I want these things to be collaborative experiences, and I feel like I get knocked down sometimes in my side of the industry because of that. And I don't know about what your feelings are on those things, but I'd like to try and get consensus, but it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, everyone is I assume that most of the people that you work with in the game industry are gamers, so they have opinions and they have experiences. And it's definitely nice to tap into that. Would you say that just would you say that most people that you've just interact with fall under like, do they like to design or do they like to take a back seat? I just want to get a read on that.
Oh man, I think it's probably 50-50 over the years, you know what I mean?
Oh,
But
okay.
but even 50-50 seems like a lower number than where I want it, where I would think they would want it to be. Especially
Right,
when you're
right,
in
right.
those scenarios where you're like, "Hey, like we've got a couple of days. Like this is our task. We got to build something cool that's in this region for the game." And I mean, this sounds like a cool topic. What do we think is cool for this thing? And I either get a whole lot of like like a whole lot of not a whole lot, and that's okay. It's fine. I mean, but that's the thing is like they're really, a lot of people are really coming for direction from design, and I get that. So try to provide that as much as possible. But yeah, it's difficult because you don't want to. I don't want to design in a chamber.
Yeah, you the way you're talking about how you like to have your teams. That was definitely how I used to do game jams. When I had a bigger team, I would take a huge back seat, and I love just throwing just about every idea together. And we've experienced this because we've done Ludum Dare together, and frankly, we we did just that. We were just like, we're not going to say no to anything.
No, we
Let's,
didn't.
let's
We
see what
didn't
happens.
at all, and it was the craziest game.
Yeah, and it had an output that's very similar to uh, my other game jams are like that, which is okay. Yeah, maybe the quality is a little unpolished, but we almost always came up with something that we've never seen before, and it's because the game I'm talking about right now. It was a very heavily themed aim trainer in a way that was very unique in that. So when you throw in ideas into a blender like that, you will definitely go very far in terms of innovation. Now whether it's in the right direction, who knows, but it'll at least shake those things up.
Yeah, but isn't that's an interesting point there, because like from the commercial side, you don't want to shake things up. They still need to be kind of
Yeah.
grounded in reality. Like you're prototyping to find the fun, but you're finding the fun within constraints of other references, other comps. You're trying to find the strengths of the game that's already there, your market audience, everything that you already should know, like who you're trying to aim for and everything like that. So you should have some general structure around all of the things. Like the problem becomes then when you're just prototyping individual gameplay mechanics, don't make the gameplay mechanic a new game to itself.
Right.
And that can be very difficult and kind of like a fallacy, because if you start having loads of those things, well then every feature is its own game. And then if every feature is its own game, your game's massive. Like how are you ever going to scope that and build towards these things as well too? It's like, figuring out the light touch is a bit more of a challenge at the same time too, and making sure that you're always trying to rope around some like loosey mechanics that are going to come down the pipe later on, right? Like, yeah, so definitely like feel that as like a blocker at certain times to creativity as well. It's like you have a little bit more rails than the Luden Dares, than any of the crazy jams, right? Like but that's not to say that you can't make something interesting, or you can't like explore the box within that segment. But I usually tend to go and try to my mind always goes to solving problems with new features, and that's always like
Right.
the biggest fallacy at the very start. It's like, we have a problem, add a whole new thing. It's like, no, maybe we just need to tweak something. Maybe we just need to tweak a flow, tweak some rewards or something like
Yeah.
that. Like we don't necessarily need to throw an entire baby and bathwater at a problem just to fix something.
When you tackle like smaller individual gameplay features, do you find that people have more opinions or less than like the big overarching stuff?
That's so funny.
Or the same.
It really depends. It depends on the person. It depends on your stakeholders, right? Like if you're talking to the other gameplay designers, then it's the individual things that matter, right? When you're talking to the UX people, it's what's the flows and the resolution of flows that matter, or that's what they should be thinking about, or at least that's what I think you should be thinking about. I know a couple of people who definitely don't think that way. And then I think from engineers' perspective, it's like, what's the implementation of this? Like, what does that mean, right? From an implementation perspective, like, oh, is this going to be like 20 million server calls? Like, is that going to be good? You know what I mean? Like, can we actually support that level of stuff?
Okay.
And these are all questions that I think individual disciplines end up starting at with their own things, but.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the reasons I wanted to ask, have you ever heard of the term bike shedding?
No.
Okay, so bike shedding is when...
Sounds British.
Maybe. The term comes from like this idea where let's say you have a nuclear power plant and you're talking about the designs for it, and nobody says anything because frankly it's above their head. But then you're like, okay, but yeah, let's add this bike shed to this nuclear power plant. And then suddenly everyone comes out of the woodworks and they have an opinion on the bike shed because they can understand it. They know what a bike shed is. It's not fancy like a nuclear power plant. So I use that term a lot because I notice it a lot. And I've noticed that when it comes to gameplay, when it comes to the grand scheme of the game idea, people can be more quiet. But then when you're working on like a UI widget, you're like, where should the stars be, up here or should they be down here? Suddenly everyone has an opinion because they can understand it and they know what it is like to move around on that thing. So I now that you're talking about it more, I remember the friction I get when it comes to finalizing the game and the details and everything. It's like suddenly I'm getting way more opinions that I have to consider. So yeah, that's my experience.
I love that. That's a great. I've never heard of that moniker before, and I'm definitely gonna have to try and keep that one. Bike shedding.
I'll link it.
My thing is, I've actually seen it in an opposite way, where like quietness does not give me confidence, right? If you're pitching an idea and everybody is quiet, that idea
Yeah.
is like, don't that idea is fucked. Like
Yeah.
don't fake yourself into thinking that like if people go and say, yeah, like that's good, like that's
Right.
bad. It's bad. Like throw it away or do something with it, burn it to the ground because
Yeah.
something is not connecting. And this is like part of the buy-in process for me too. It's like if we're going to be pitching features, I want you to on paper think that like this is going to be fun. Like I need that before I can even go and confidently say like this is something that we should really really go forward with. Like can I see it on paper and say that's going to be interesting? There's enough dynamics here that's going to be interesting for the player or interesting to play or play in my mind, right? Like I can see it on the paper. But those things come down to a couple of different areas. How well you're actually pitching to your team means how well they're actually going to understand your idea, and how well you can communicate that to your team is like a big, big thing. You can't go off in a 20-minute rant about one prototyping idea and say, this is it, guys, like, check this out, right? You know, and just talk, talk, talk. You got to open the room up floors, right? But you should be able to communicate these things quickly. And I do that a
Yeah.
lot through visuals, but I do that a lot through just like feature briefs is what I call them, where they're just like paragraphs, very very simple paragraph mechanics of just like start, win condition, dynamics of battle, and like what are the interesting choices that players are trying to make during those times, right? And just try to get those things across and communicate it through a visual and a little bit of text. If people don't resonate with the idea at the highest level like that, don't go deeper. Just talk to them and say
Yeah.
what doesn't what doesn't feel right, right? Like what is not resonating with you? What doesn't make sense in your own mind? And they might not get it. Like they might just be, you know, there might be just some context that's just missing. But then you take that and you add that context later on because you're like
Yep.
that was a disconnect. Think of these as just like new players coming into your feature
Yeah.
as much as you can, but yeah, don't harp on it then too. Have a couple more in your back pocket, throw a bunch away.
Yeah, I mean that's so accurate to what you should be doing. It's all about communication, and I'll kind of give like an analogy to help with that. Like almost like what you're talking about. Like as a designer, you have like the pyramids in your head, and everyone has nothing. So you're describing the pyramids the best you can, and in their head, in each individual head, some people might like envision the actual pyramids. Some people might be like, oh, he means like a square thing. Like everyone is developing this different visual of what the game is going to be, and your job as a communicator is to get everyone on your page. And yes, you're right, you need to factor in cognitive limits. You know, some people might just, oh man, if you just go into like a big, you know, a big deep game design like deep dive, yeah, you're not going to build the right thing because people are losing interest and they're building it wrong. So it's like it's this game. It's like what you said about Fatui. You need is like bringing a new player into your game. You need to treat it like that.
Yeah, and this is the difference then between feature development and new game ideas, right? Feature development revolves around like, hey, what is this feature supposed to do inside my game? Right? What's it supposed to do for the product? What's it supposed to do for the player? And what are the goals of that feature? So like as a designer, I need a feature that's going to sit in here. It's going to be like 4 guilds. It's going to be, you know what I mean, some big mechanic that's going to do something, right? But like have some goals. Just I can't throw things out without
Yeah.
reiterating into other things. So I don't want to do that. But have those goals as these pillars of your own design, and make sure that you know when you actually are designing that thing that you are then designing for the feature, for where it's supposed to sit, and not necessarily as like a standalone thing. Sometimes features don't actually need to be that interesting because they're supposed to fit within something else that's more interesting. So it's like depending on how you're like focusing on that prototype, right? You're like, we're prototyping this little thing, and there's actually this other bigger mass that the player had to get through to even get to that feature. Then think about that. You have to build that into your context and make sure that that's part of it, because if you're only looking at one piece in isolation, you need to make sure that, like, yeah, but that's not part of the whole puzzle. That's not part of the whole flow. It's not part of the whole thing. So you need to make sure that you're cognizantly thinking about that, and then not building this one piece as like one individual thing. Because then when you go around the flow and get to there, it's like, well, what the fuck was this? Like, why didn't you put that level of craft into all of this, right? Like, and it'll all feel very, very disconnected. Whereas, you know, at least new game ideas, you're like, it could be anything. It can kind of be the stars, right? And that's like a big deal.
You know, kind of talking about like the one of the initial sparks of this. So one of the questions then becomes, what? Let's just say people are on the same page. They know exactly what you want to do and what, maybe even why it's supposed to do it. But what happens when a teammate doesn't believe in what you said? And I'll very quickly give two examples. The simplest one is, let's say you asked me to do a narrative feature, and you're like, this is going to save the game, and I'm like, you know what? I hate narrative. This isn't going to save the game at all.
No one reads. No one reads.
Yeah. And then I'll give a more real life example because this happened before. I wanted to make a game that was kind of like I Am Bread, like more slower and maybe strategic. And a person who was on the team was like, I really like action games. This guy needs to be flying around at all times. And there's, you know, two ends of the spectrum. And that one was hard to resolve. So I'm curious, like, you know, on your clashes, like, what should you do?
No, these things have absolutely happened, and this is like one of the hardest things when you get in. It's a scary moment when you're starting a game jam, even just a game jam, with new people, because you have no idea of like the level of baggage that you're kind of bringing in from some of these things, and personality is like so huge. Like, look, the industry is going through a massive change, and you can't just bulldog people in the design team pit anymore, right? Like, these things fucking suck. Nobody wants to do that. And it was never really good in the first place, right? You know, so you can't have a domineering attitude about it. But what I try to desperately to do is come to some form of consensus of making sure that we are all at least aligned by why we're not doing something, right? Like the flip side of it too. So this could be a few different things. One, it could be the goals. Hey, like, the action RPG side of things doesn't fit within our game. Like, it's too fast paced, it's too slow paced. Like, our player market is, we're going for these people, and they don't like that kind of game, and we're in this market segment building this type of game, and none of those games support that level of gameplay. Like, that's... So, part of that is, like, a twofold prong thing of, like, hey, gain reference. Like, we need... You know what I mean? I need you to go and, like, play a couple of these other games. I need you to see this. But that also flips from the other side, though, too. If they have a need for something that's, like, a scratch that's not being itched, and you're inside of a you know, just a game jam experience, I would always try to amalgamate their ideas in. So it's like, can I give them something that gets them there, right? That gets them that itch. What do they really want? Is it just that they just need faster paced gameplay and faster paced decisions? Well, okay, can we make that somewhere? Like, can I give them that feeling? Like, is it not the feeling of just being able to zip and zoom, you know, move around really fast, or hey, it's platforming inside of a turn-based game? It's like, okay, you know, like, it's scary, but, you know, sure, maybe that's kind of cool. I don't know. Oh, you know, they don't really go together, but, like, those are the challenges that we face together as a team in the full-on game jam aspect. But there is a different side, I think, in, you know, I mean, again, like on the independent side or on the commercial side, where you do kind of need to ground people in some factoids and using game reference and taking in their game reference too. If they can't give you game reference and they can't actualize or verbalize it too, well, then it doesn't help for then the rest of the team, because it can't just be a one-on-one battle, and there's all these other people who already are aligned, right? Like they have to also get on the same page, like with the this fast-paced RPG, turn-based RPG too, right? Like they need to get there as well. So try to then also rope these other people in with like, okay, well, what do you guys think that means? Like, do you guys think that we can make that work? And then allow this is like a sad thing, but like allow the dissent to try to push the idea along a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
So like if one person is battling out and holding out, and you have a couple more teammates, and you know that those teammates don't necessarily either agree or disagree, and they're gonna poke holes a little bit more, let them poke holes because everybody's pitching. So give everybody every idea the scrutiny that it needs, and then try to from there see if somebody either drops or you can amalgamate between the lot of you a better idea out of all of that.
Yeah.
But I've definitely had game teams that have just fucking exploded. Like in college, it's gotta be this. That sucks.
Yeah,
What the fuck? And then it just blows up, and you're like, all right.
Yeah. As we're talking about this, I'm thinking of more and more examples that have happened. But one thing.
Just don't. Sorry, I don't mean to cut. Just it's like don't be so dynamic of a personality, or don't be so static as a personality. Like
yeah, for sure.
You gotta work with people. Like
you will.
End of the day, it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, you will probably get feedback in the form of having less teammates in the future if you are too static. So
yeah.
I'll leave it at that. But one thing you reminded me of is pillars. When I think about it, when it has come to seemingly 50-50 coin flips as to which direction we should go, pillars have always helped me now. So pillars are set rules you want about your game. For one of my games, I have something that says fun over strategy, and obviously you get some people that are like, oh, but strategy is fun. But I'm like, this pillar has helped me a lot.
That's
because
a good one.
anytime I think about adding like another system of depth, I'm like, no. When I started making this game, I wanted people to just move things around, and even if it's broken, just let it happen. So I think at least pillars make it a little less personal. You're no longer like battling my idea versus your idea. You're like, hey, we set this a while back, or the CEO set this back, and at least that takes a little bit of the sting out of the debates. Now, do you guys have like pretty strong pillars?
Not for the commercial side, but for the indie side, yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
And it's because back in the day when I was really doing this, that was what I focused on, because that was a real big portion of how you're building holistic game design and trying to keep an entire game loop on track is pillars.
Okay.
So with Shelter Story, I started with 10 pillars. And
wow.
And ranked them based off of how much I believed in them, and then went to our other designers and other people and just was like, this is the tenets for the game. I came down on high with 10 commandments and said, this is the things that we need to uphold in the game here, right? And these things are kind of simple, right? Like emotionality in dogs needs to. I'm not saying it outright correct. Absolutely correctly. I have like nice weird statements, but like emotions matter, right? Or something like that. Like, so it's like hold that higher in your esteem and make sure that everything that you're doing has that cognitive bias in there, right? Like everything is pointing towards that thing, the emotions, right? In Swing Striker, we have them in our pitch decks, and we have them in our pitch decks because they ring true throughout the entire game. Competitive at heart, but lighthearted about it. That is the core focus of that game, is make something that's fun and competitive, but you could be playing with your friends beside you, or you could be playing with people online, and you can be screaming and shouting, and you want to win. You're emboldened to win, but everything around you is happening so sillily.
Yeah.
Everything is so silly, and interesting things are happening and coming at you, and your characters are dynamic and different, and so make it weird, make it fun, but you know that like at the end of the day, like yes, it should still feel competitive. So you can't just have like no edge, but you have to make sure that it's at least a nice, it's fun about it. So it's not trying to be so sadistic when it comes to like MOBAs, and it's like I fucking ruined you and I've killed you 12 times. It's like that should be a fun thing, right? Like
Right,
I
right.
killed you 12 times, yeah, but I still scored 2 more goals than you, so fuck you, right? Like, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's these things I think are just really important. Neil Edwards, I showed you that talk, like my buddy Neil, UX is fine, not CEO, but heavy partner, one of the starting founders of that company, did a talk for me with the Rocky Mountain Game Developer Association, and it's recorded. It's on YouTube, and he breaks down the like player profiles way more than anybody has up to that date. It really is like an amazing talk. Really goes into player dynamics and who are the people that are playing your games, and those player archetypes. What are they seeking from your game at the same time too? And it gives people a couple of new metrics to actually like analyze and look at game design and say like, is this fun or is this not? Does this design give the player like what they need to do things? But he's just taken that and kind of moved that even forward, even more, and continued down that pathway. And it's really interesting seeing kind of like, you know, if you don't, if you're a I love Bartol's taxonomy of player for RPGs, social players, explorers, fighters, like traders, right? Like these types of really hardcore dynamics, but you can split that like a couple of other different ways these days, and really expand upon it, and it gives you some interesting ways to even just go and say, well, I'm targeting these players with this feature. So it's like even that gives you some basis or some root, and say,
Yeah.
those are my stakeholders. I'm building this for players. Like I'm building this to be played, to be enjoyed. I'm not just building it just for myself. Nobody's doing that. I need this to be played. So who's going to play it? And that's like always the first question. It's like that's why from a UX standpoint, user profiles are so fucking great. Like having some fake user that's like, this is Betty, and Betty is this type of player, and she plays these games, and this is her household, this is her living, this is her kind of daily routine, and this is why she engages with your product. It's like, is Betty gonna like this game if we put in this highly Twitch feature, into our game that's all about, playing bubble pop or something like that, right? Like, no, she's not, because she's not,
Yeah.
not really gonna enjoy it. So having some roots, but that's so different, than the indie side, or not the indie side, I should say, but just from the game jam side, when you're just like, the fuck is it? Just fucking
Yeah.
cold.
You might have some crazier pillars in that case. Maybe your pillars are just let's do something new. Actually, now that you mention it, I do have pillars. They're not set in stone, but I always tell people it. I'm like, we're not going to do something we think everyone else is going to do.
Yeah.
That's like one of my number one pillars. So you guys can
These are big
can
things
definitely
to bring
set
in.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big things to bring in. Like I was like, technology. We're gonna do VR.
Right.
Right. I don't give a shit what we're building, but we're building in VR.
Exactly.
It's like that's one of the
Exactly.
pillars of this thing. Is like that's our constraint, right? Like that's what we're gonna do here.
Another variant. So global game jam is an in-person one, and I tell everyone that oh, by the way, do you need to go because you or no? Okay, I always tell everyone, listen, it's in person, so any bugs we can hand wave. So I actually tell people, let's make a good experience that's gonna look great when we present it.
Oh,
So
that's so funny.
yeah, it's not obvious at all because I know in the past we've spent a lot of time like ironing out stuff that would matter for like Ludum Dare, like a nice package. But I was like, no, man, we're sitting next to them, we're joking, we're establishing a relationship. You can do a lot crazier things with a game when you're doing that.
You're so funny. That's some snaky rule stuff right there.
Yeah, but so yeah, but back to pillar stuff. So you should be coming out with pillars very early. It should be either step 1 or step 2. Like, because you're right, you mentioned the audience, and I was thinking about three personas, and I made a pillar for each of them, basically. So you can come up with the game design and then come up with your pillars, or even establish your pillars and then come up with a game design that hits against that. But either way, it needs to be really early. And this also applies to solo devs. And in some ways, even especially solo devs, because you are also going to waver a lot. I know right now, all you solo devs have like your dream idea in your head, but I assure you, you're gonna waver as
I
finally
bet you
put things through the test.
Yeah, and I bet you it's an MMORPG.
Exactly.
I swear to God, the amount of fucking kids I'm like, I'm building this MMO, and I'm like, no, you're not. You're not.
Yeah.
You're not doing it.
So you're gonna feel like you're set in stone, but that's only because you're pretty much at the concept level, maybe some of the mechanics, but as you're ironing stuff out and figuring out if you need to go left or right, man, those pillars will be helpful.
Yeah, so maybe you don't even need to think of them as pillars, right? But I always think of, well, I go back to like my sandbox analogy of like, you need constraints at times, right? Like if it's too open, it's hard to really like nail into something. So try to find some constraints for yourself, right? Like whether it be a technology, whether it be just saying we're going to innovate and we're not doing anything that anybody else is doing, it has done, or we're not going to the first logical conclusion that we're going to do. We're not making like, you know, we're going crazy with it. Well, great. Like those things then at least retroactively then should pump back into your game design and just say, okay, well, we know we're using this technology, so what's the constraints of that? And we know that we want to do something completely different, so like, what are the ideas that are the most off the wall, and rank those higher, right? And what do we kind of resonate from there? You know, you can build pillars within pillars, right? Like it's, you know, I mean, there's like top level game pillars. It's like these things, these crutches that we want to hold on to, and I like to come to those either before or after the game, but they kind of go hand in hand sometimes. Like you finding the game, or at least finding the game concept, is one thing, but then as you're fleshing things out, have basic things that you hold strong to that you want to resonate throughout the game. I want emotional intent to be a major factor here. I want players to really feel whenever they take an action. It's like, okay, well, great. Like that's a pillar, but it wasn't necessarily part of your game concept. It didn't need to be, but maybe the pillar came from your game concept, but that's now what you need to ring true throughout the game design. As you're building, you need to remember, like, we came up with this concept, and the concept drove us into, we want this heavy emphasis on this thing, because that's what we feel like lives and dies by the concept. And then if we can drive that home, well, then we can stay a lot truer to what our original intent was. But when we get into these scenarios, especially the time box of how much time you actually have to come up with the idea before you get started, is like a scary thing. Like it's so funny being like, you got a week to prototype, you got a week to or you know, a couple of days to build a game. And especially at Global Game Jam, when everybody else is around you, and you like get your team together, you have the theme, and then everybody's like, oh, so anybody got any ideas? And they're like, I ain't got fucking shit, dude. I don't know what the hell I'm doing here, right? And then you look around, and you're like, oh, fuck. Like, they're already fucking coding. Like, they're already going.
Oh my god, that's every time.
People are writing on the white,board. People are nodding. Calvin, they're nodding. they've got consensus. There's a quorum over there. Like, we're fucked.
There's so much, man, you hit home so much, because I run like giant teams, like 14 people. And obviously it just takes a long time to get to that consensus. And then you look at a team of just like 3 people off in the corner. Yeah, they started coding like a long time ago. So you're absolutely right. Please continue.
I've never even seen a 14-person game jam team. Like that's fucking freaky.
And half of the people I don't even know. So they're new people.
And how do you do that? Like, how do you get all those people on the same page? Like, are they all just kind of looking around? Like, is like half of the group looking around for the idea, for somebody else to come up with the idea? Or do you actually do try to get everybody on the same, like, everybody
Yeah.
have some input in on the whole thing? But, you know, I mean, the big thing is time constraints. Like, if you only have, like, fucking 4 hours to get that idea out, that time's ticking, so you better get to something quick.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I'll try to roll it up into a more general thing that people should be paying attention to. So, you're right. With a big team, you need a different way to do it. If you have 3 people, you just talk it over. But for 14 people, I noticed that like people would often just like get talked over by the loud people. So I started doing mind mapping. Yeah, yeah. So I give everyone a marker, and then we just draw a gigantic mind map over the whiteboard, and that way everyone at least gets some buy-in, and we can talk about a lot of different ideas. And the more general thing I want to talk about, because this is really global game jam specific, I guess, is that your organizational structure. And yes, I know that org structures are so dry to most people, but it's good. Hopefully, I can talk about why it matters. Org structures are about communication. So when you have a small team, let's say you're an indie team of 5, your org structure is going to be a lot different than
A lot flatter.
yeah, than your team of 30. But when you have 30, you're going to need hierarchies. It all comes down to the efficiency of communication. And why is communication important? Is what we talked about earlier. Everyone needs to be on the same page. So as dry of a topic as it is of org structures, it is extremely important, especially if you're building your own company. You need to think about these things as you grow. If you are more interested in it, there Jesse Shell, who does a lot of talks, he writes books. He talks a lot about org structures actually, because he had to grow from small to large. So
Yeah.
think about that, depending on if you're AAA or whatever.
That's difficult. That's really difficult. But yeah, I don't know. Like, out of all of these things, then you start putting pad to paper, and you'll inevitably, do you pivot within your designs as you're going? Like, let's say you're in LD, and it's just not fucking. This is not
Damn.
fun. It was just fucking. All right, this is missing something. And you just hit. You didn't hit the mark.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Man, what a great question. I can't even think of any principles around that. I can only think of examples. And I will say this. For Ludum Dare, I typically don't find the fun until like the last few hours. The game is not fun until then. So everyone has a belief. I guess from my experience, I will.
The fun is in the suffering that we have
Yeah.
making it. That's my
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
my fun.
Yeah,
The games I usually end up with are fucking terrible.
I will give this as an answer. As a team, the more you work with each other and hopefully get some small wins, the more you guys can remember those wins and be like, you know what, we've been in this scenario 5 times already. We know we're gonna find the fun in the last hour. And the last example is the last game jam I just did couple weekends ago. I only worked with my wife. She did coding and art, but I was like, okay, here's the pitch. I want to do like exorcists and like cards. It was like a 1 sentence pitch that made no sense, but she was like, okay, I know you'll figure it out.
She was like, I love you.
Also that.
It's like, I trust you. All right, let's fucking do it, I guess.
Yep, a lot of eye rolling, but it was ultimately a trust that I could figure it out in the end. So yeah, that trust factor that will come into play when in those pivots. I guess that's the best I can answer, but I'd love to hear your answer to that. When do you pivot, and how do you pull that off?
I think
it was gonna be hard.
You pivot early and often. I am not a person for build that game down the line and then wait until the last hour.
Yeah.
I look at it as like we are talking the whole way, and as people are implementing that feature and getting that thing in, does it come together? Like,
yeah.
right? Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at this, and we've already gone 30 plus minutes on this, but there's a lot of different ways to think about the actual idea of building that game idea. You can start with a really, really high level concept and say, we're building a base. We're building a base of something that says that we can then build a couple of other things and sprinkle it in once we get there. But we need a base that's fun by itself, right? So very simple mechanics, very simple arenas, very simple something that then gives us the ability to go and say, well, great, now we have this. We're going to now play and prototype within that play space, right? So I'm building this framework for myself to say, well, we're going to find some fun in building mechanics on top of the mechanics that we're already building, right? That's fine. That's okay. You can totally do that. That's one way of doing it. A lot of the times players will just go and say, no, we need to have the whole idea, and we need to be aligned on the whole idea before we even put pad to paper.
Right.
I don't necessarily agree with that too, but I do agree with it more, especially when you're in shorter time framed game jam stuff. When you're in more like longer prototyping sessions and you're trying to find the fun, you know what I mean, at least trying to figure out like, okay, what is the absolute base here that we all align with, that we're happy with, is a jumping off point for then saying, okay, we'll go deeper later on. And that is when you're like a couple of hours before the end and all of a sudden it all kind of comes together and you're like, fuck, we need health pickups. We need, what about this gun? Couldn't this be interesting? Like, throw that in there. And then all of a sudden you try to find some interest, you know, there and some intrigue. But that's not holistic game design, right? That's not you holistically thinking about the entire experience together, how it compounds and builds on top of each other.
Yeah.
That's you thinking about just what is my breadth of base and saying what you know, is it chess, is it checkers on top of all of that, right? And everything else. And I don't know which way is better or best, but I've definitely had, these are some of the conceits that you have to make, or concessions you have to make when you're trying to go fast, but also try to go organic, right? Where you're like, the team is not aligned around the whole idea, but you might have gotten them aligned around the base of the idea. So every idea that you're coming up with is always setting in this arena. Well, great. Well, then build that arena at least, and then let's take a couple of more times and like find out, okay, like what's interesting that we can do on this thing? What's the shape of it? What's, you know what I mean? But we're still aligned there. So having like micro alignments is important. You don't need to get everybody around the entirety of what you're doing. It's just like, can I get you something? And that sounds like a lot of what you were talking about. It's like, I want cards and I want it to be in this kind of theme. And it's like, okay, go. We're going to kind of figure out what that means later on, but we know that we can at least probably solve those questions. It's just, what are we doing here?
Man, I think when you, like, especially you've definitely worked with larger teams than I have. Like, those micro concessions are going to be really important to keeping the glue together. I do want to give like a counter example, because there was a Ludum Dare where we had 12 people. 9 of the people were veterans that have worked with me a lot, and then 3 of the others were this whole different group that I didn't know, and they were kind of a group together. Yeah, a clique, exactly. I wanted to say that. So they came in, they didn't agree with the idea, and it took. I honestly, I was like, hey, we're running out of time. Let's just go with this. So I unfortunately had to bully them out of it. But here's the thing: the game, as usual, was not fun for a long time, and the leader of the group, he constantly said, guys, this isn't fun. We need to pivot. Hour 6, guys, this isn't fun. Let's pivot. Hour 9, we got to pivot. And then the whole time I was like, relax, we got this. And the only reason I was able to do that...
Hold my cake. Okay, shut the fuck up, boy.
This isn't great politics or anything, but the only reason I was able to do that was because I had 8 other people that could say, don't worry, exactly, we got this. And then that ended up
in.
And that ended up being one of our highest rated game jam games ever out of the entire group. So I mean, I that's
and you never spoke to that person ever again. That's why networking is important, people. Don't be me, because I was that guy for fucking forever.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah,
be me. Like, do
yeah.
better, please. For God's sake. I've learned through failure on this. Like, make
The in,
friends, not enemies.
yeah, and I don't. Yeah, and the interesting resolution of that was, I think I gained his trust because he was willing to talk more once he's like, oh, because we actually placed top 5 in in the humor category.
Oh,
Top
cool.
5 out of thousands of entries is pretty good. So in that regard, I earned his trust, but I'm not saying this is the best way because you are going to go to teams that have no idea what your track record is and probably think their track record's better than you. So this is not a great thing, but I'm just saying that in terms of pivot, it's a very tough scenario.
Yeah,
Knowing when to pivot.
yeah. If you try to pivot within the game, don't once you kind of solidify the block like at that top level, like if you're 6 hours in, 8 hours in already, like you're a day into a 2-day game jam. Best of fucking luck. You're gonna pivot and redo all of that again. Like you're gonna be really set back. Like you just don't have that time to waste. So it is kind of like once you are locked in, it's like okay, this isn't fun, but like what's gonna make it fun within the thing? Because you can't, can't just pivot out. Well, you can. You can absolutely just pivot directly out of the idea. How do you get people to make? I think scope is always the huge thing here, right? Too like people get really freaked out with some of these things, and tools really help here too. Like having a breadth of knowledge of just Unity assets that you can just pull from the shelf and be like inventory system, drag and drop UI, like there's shit tons of plugins for all of these things and loads of code that you can find out online for all of that really help to kind of like bolster your game, add new things. You don't always need to be building from the base. But like I would say like the biggest thing for me that game jams always helped was kind of like core technology later on, right? You could take something and build something really, really fast, but then you could say, well, like great, for this game prototype I built drag and drop UI, so I can drag cards onto a battlefield, just like I can do a Hearthstone. Well, great. Like I might have wrote that code once, and I might have wrote it really, really fast, but now I could take that code and build it into a component library that I could then keep in my own Git repo. And at any point that I ever need that ever again, I can just dip into my own toolbox. Like, thinking around those lines too of like, and I don't like animating UI. It's like, okay, let's use dot tween or lean tween or something like that. Well, like, great, I've gotten some great base level knowledge. Now I can re-implement that wherever I want. And now wherever I go, like, that's part of my toolbox. That's a tool that I'm going to use because I'm good with it. So it doesn't always, when you're programming or wherever, it doesn't always have to be starting from absolute nothing. It's like you can try to leverage some technology that you're good or bad at, or think that like, hey, maybe I'm just going to work on something completely different too, So I don't know, I feel like those things are always in the positions of, are you trying to win? And I would say that you specifically are trying to win. Whereas like when I'm doing a game jam, I'm just trying to get the fucking game out. I'm just trying to get it done. I'm not trying to win anything.
No, yeah, your reasons for doing it are definitely gonna affect that for sure. Nowadays, I actually don't necessarily want to perform well as much as actually my own self-pillar. I just want to make a game that nobody has seen before. I crave those comments. So that's been one of my things for sure. But you're right. When it comes to group buy-in, okay, this is like negotiation. This is like a whole different topic, and this is like social skills and everything. You're gonna have to convince people one way or another. Yeah. And when it comes to scope, that's one way, is to remind people, hey, we only have a few days, and immediately people will be somewhat realistic about that. That's one way. Another thing you actually kind of touched upon is sometimes I'll just be like, hey, if we do this game that you don't want to do, we'll have a library to do something else later. I mean, you just have to be really clever about why you're doing the game jam and different angles and the different advantages it could be for that person individually. But this is a deep topic.
I love it. All right. I got 10 minutes before my next meeting.
Sounds good.
Calvin, thanks for ripping this out with me today.
Yep.
And enjoy the rest of your afternoon, okay?